one of the biggest, I would say, benefits is that like is belief. Belief meaning we believe in our clients, and we're always talking about, hey, you can do this. And we're pushing them, finding that sweet spot. Remember, if something's too easy, there's gonna be boredom. If something's too difficult, there's gonna be frustration. Find that sweet spot of challenge for them, and every time they come in, that's part of what you do. You challenge and push them to the next level. Back at it, Coach's Corner with another in-staff. Again, this in-staff, by the way, shout out to Alan Cosgrove, great friend. A lot of stuff that I still continue to learn from him. He's one of the original OGs, started semi-private personal training, has had a gym, I think, for 23 years now, right? So I think I've had it for a long time, but that guy's really had it for a long time. With that said, basically the question from one of my coaches was, training the beginner. So obviously we get a lot of beginners here. Yes, we train, NFL guys, NBA guys, elite athletes, pro sports teams, but the majority of our clientele, general population that wants to move, feel, look, perform better. And a lot of times are starting and are beginners. Now look, if I'm gonna, first of all, we say like, what does beginner mean? A person that's just starting to learn a skill or take part in an activity. So by the way, that means, it's kind of like, I've trained some really elite athletes. They were elite in sport, but beginners with their nutrition, for example, or beginners with certain, strength training. So just so you know, you can be a beginner and be advanced in something and be a beginner in something else. Mark Verstegen says this well, if you haven't done this before, you're a beginner. So if people come in and go like, they don't have experience with strength training, resistance training, they're a beginner. So I'm gonna take you guys through a framework of really simple, and this is the whole point of it, right? Is the simplicity of it to make sure that you can build a program in a simple way through kind of these blocks. And it all starts with assessment. By the way, I'm not gonna, what type of assessment you should do. Is it the FMS? Is it FRA? Is it? I think that having multiple, again, the ability, and have done multiple different assessments. Like we've just kind of created our own, built our own, in a sense. But really, you want to find out how does a person move? What are their limitations? What are their abilities? Right? Can they squat? Do they have a hip mobility restriction? Do they have an ankle mobility restriction? Do they have a stability, balance restriction? Can they rotate their thoracic spine? Can they overhead flex? Again, if you passed overhead flexion test, you can press overhead. If you can't, which a lot of people don't, we're going to adjust that when it comes to your training. So this is just going to tell us a lot about what to do / what not to do, right? And again, any type of assessment is a good assessment. And sometimes I always say that every training session is an assessment in of itself, okay? From there, like these are the 5 different blocks that we're gonna go through. Ramp, which is the warm-up, that stands for range of motion activation, movement prep, core work, power, resistance, which is your strength training, and then your metabolic, which is your cardio. And the reason why for beginners, like while this model is a little bit different than my athlete for life model, because when people are coming in, we're still going to include things like that, by the way, but again, we're getting somebody proficient in strength training, in movement, and this is what I've found to be the most effective to teach my team. So when somebody comes in, we are gonna, we do teach people foam rolling and breathing drills, kind of resets, from the R7. And the reality is like we only have so much time. So when I look at this, these 5 blocks, like that's gonna be an hour or less. So we always have to be time cognizant, right? And yes, I want people to foam roll, but we're gonna usually focus on about 4 different knots, right? So again, it might be, for somebody, it might be lats, it might be glutes, it might be calves, it might be, adductors. Again, we're gonna focus on the things that are tight and usually just say, hey, listen, once you get to that like tender spot, hang out there and then just breathe. Do 4 to 5 breaths. We're not gonna necessarily just always roll it. We might just hang out there, right? Exhale, inhale, and let that kind of tone down. Again, like listen, people are coming in, they're pretty tight, wound up, stressed out. So this is a smart thing to do, right? And we could argue about what does foam rolling and soft tissue work do. But the reality of it is that like this helps people, right? From there we go to our ramp, which is our range of motion, activation, and movement prep. And I'm gonna give you an actual example. By the way, when people say the whole like stretching doesn't work, so on and so forth, listen, all the studies have shown that like stretching is not good if you stretch for long periods of time and then you go do power work right away. That's not how we do it, right? But people, and myself included, feel a lot better once they stretch. If I'm doing my couch stretch, my pigeon stretch, or my 90-90 stretch, my lateral line stretches, I do that always first before I train. and then I do my mobility drills, and then I start ramping it up, right? So because of that, like again, you can see this in this example, and this flows. This is the other thing too, that the way that this is set up is that you're not switching so many positions. Couch stretch is where we're gonna stretch that hip flexor, back foot up on the couch, on a chair, and 45 seconds per side, right? We're really gonna feel that front line stretch. We can even reach up to get a little extra out of that. From there, we go to 90-90 glute stretch. You can be on the floor where we're sitting into that hip, getting a glute stretch, half kneeling. So from there, we're just going to a half kneeling position, doing our thoracic rotations, 8 per side, world's greatest stretch. I think that was termed by Mark Verstegen, but it's like that Spider-Man lunge position, right? Where we're down here and then we're opening up. From there, we go squat to stand for 8. Then we start going into a little bit of, I would say, elasticity, right? Forward to back jumps, side to side jumps. We're gonna go in a lateral lunge. We want some of that frontal plane. Rotational jumps, lunge with rotation, and I like doing high knees at the end. This should probably take about 8 minutes to 10 minutes. I mean, 10 minutes is max. And maybe if somebody's like a lot more deconditioned, it might take a little bit longer, which by the way, you know, some folks might be like, go through that and feel warmed up, they're sweating. For some, this might be a workout, right? This might be decently challenging. So if I looked at these 5 as a piece of the pie, right? So think about it as a pie, you know, how we divide the percentages of each one, right, is gonna be dependent on a person's goals, fitness level, things of that nature, right? So again, you might be spending a good chunk of time in ramp, and that's actually gonna be fitness. That's actually gonna be training for somebody, right? But again, this is an important factor for just about everybody. And it's important to take people through and actually coach up the technique, right? Again, in all these phases, like I'm gonna constantly keep coming back to like the standard of the reps. Like what is the standard of reps? Because the standard that you create is the standard that's gonna be kept to as we continue going through this training. So I'm gonna keep coming back to that. From there, we go from ramp to power, right? And with beginners, we're not gonna do as much of that contrast training. We're usually gonna use 1 to 2 exercises, but we do know that, by the way, that, you know, we lose power, speed, and elasticity faster than we lose strength and then we lose muscle mass, right? So that's why we wanna include it in every program. Couple examples here, upper body, we got med ball throws, and we can have forward throws, slams, rotational slams, scoop tosses, right? And the thing is, one that's really great is battling ropes, right? They're fun. You can do fast things, you can do slams, right? You can do different rotational things, and people will have fun with it, right? But again, if you do it fast, now we're developing that upper body power here. From there, we got lower body, jumps, hops, kettlebell swings. I like sleds as well, right? Because we can weight it up enough to where it's fast, but not, you know, we're not gonna go do sprints with beginners right off the bat. Again, when we do, I like to start with like things like box jumps, because there's, we jump on a box, we stick it, we step off, right? We're not having these like really big plyometric forces right off the bat. Obviously, as somebody gets more trained, we will start taking them through that. We'll start progressing. Again, everything should be progressed. And, you know, we want to think about this. Probably, you know, a big mistake when it comes to program design tends to be, you know, if we're gradually progressing, you'll see a lot of this, right? Where people will just, I'll say, really push, I would say the different, not to say techniques that become advanced too fast, and again, people can't handle that. So this is really important, again, why we're driving and dialing into the beginner training. From power, we go to core. And another one to why, you know, with beginners, do I like plugging that in? Because people tend to have weak core. So whatever is the primary thing that we do is usually going to improve the most, right? So if I'm fresh and I'm doing these things at the beginning, those things are gonna probably improve the most. And the reality is, you know, you've heard this in the past where they go like, oh, if you put in core training first, the core will get fatigued and it's gonna mess with the main lifts. I've never seen that happen. First of all, we're not just doing like 40 minutes of core training and fatiguing and then going to a heavy squat. That's not the case, right? But what we found is that adding core training in has really helped with everything else. And as you'll see in a sample program, there's not a ton of it. But we break it down into, again, simplicity here, simplicity. Anti-extension, which would be an example of a plank. Anti-flexion, for example, would be a bird dog. anti-lateral flexion, side plank, anti-rotation, which is anti-rotational press. And then we can progress these. I mean, you know, the different planks, the different variations. I mean, you can progress the hell out of it. But again, these are baseline things that we want people to own before they go to the next step. Even something like a bird dog, right, where we're gonna go with the bird dog, but now we can add a sandbag pull through. Boom, other side, sandbag pull through, right? We can add a lot of different things to now progress it with every one of these. And by the way, you know, if you want to look up, for example, plank variations, I have a video somewhere on YouTube that's got like 60 something plank variations. So if you ever got bored, you know, core exercises, there's hundreds of them that just in my videos that you could plug in into one of these categories. But again, there's tons of variation. But we want to start with the basics, and we want to own the basics. From the core, we go to resistance training. So that's our strength training. A simple breakdown with examples, right? We've got squat, hinge, push, pull. So this is a really easy way to look at it. But then under the squat, we have asymmetrical, symmetrical, and single leg. So an example for asymmetrical here would be a split squat. Symmetrical is a squat. Single leg is a step up. With the hinge, same thing, asymmetrical, symmetrical, single leg. We got a staggered RDL, right? So we can have staggered RDL with double dumbbells, with one dumbbell, you know, pushing up against the wall. We got symmetrical, which is a bridge. So I categorize, I would say, hip thrusts and bridges under that hinge or deadlift, right? So you got bridge or deadlift in that scenario. And then we have single leg, which would be a single leg RDL. And of course, you also have, you know, supported single leg RDL and so on and so forth. For our push, we have horizontal, push up, vertical, half kneeling press. For pull, we have horizontal, vertical, for instance, half kneeling cable row here, or tall kneeling pull down, right? So on our knees, doing a pull down. So again, this like makes it simple when we're categorizing this in a program design, and we want to really build up the foundation and the basics. So when we flip it around, last one of those blocks is metabolic / cardio. And the simplest thing to do, right, for just, I know I can get pretty much anyone on this, even if they have, you know, injuries most of the time, is the air dive bike, right? The bike is the simplest way to plug in cardio for most people. And an example here of a progression would be week 1 through 4. By the way, like, this is another thing that most folks just start, you know, too hard, too much. For instance, 15 seconds of work, 45 seconds of rest. Teaching people to work for shorter periods of time, but like really pushing the intensity. And we'd only start with about 3 sets here, right? So week 1's 3 sets, week 2's 4, week 3's 5, week 4's 6. You know, cardio is very well just progressed, very, you know, set by set, week by week. And then in week 5, we'd ramp up the time. So we'd go 20 seconds and we cut down the rest break to 40 seconds. Notice these kind of micro progressions that work really, really well. At week 5, we could change the method and maybe go something with like a ski erg or a sled push or maybe battling ropes. But again, I would probably keep it on the bike for the first 8 weeks. And you can see people just do really well with this, right? So we increase volume, then we decrease volume, and then up the intensity, and again, increase volume again, right? So putting this all together, let's look at 2 different days here. Day 1, we got core, we got our plank, and we have our tall kneeling anti-rotation. So this one's for time, for instance, 30 seconds. This one we do for reps, might be like, for instance, 10 to 12. For power, we have med ball slams, right? We're just having somebody get on their toes, slam as hard as they possibly can. Strength, we got a kettlebell goblet squat, very likely on a wedge, right? So that they have a better, more upright posture. And a half kneeling, right? So half kneeling cable row. And our second superset is gonna be a staggered stance, and I would do staggered stance RDL with one leg pushing into the wall for stability, right? So I'm pushing and keeping my hips nice and locked in, and then push-ups. And a push-up variation might be like, hey, we're elevating the barbell on a rig so that they're not on the floor because they can't do it because they're a beginner. And then we're gonna do bike for 3 sets of 15 on, 45 off. Day 2, core, remember we had 4 different, I would say, categories there. Now we got a side plank, anti-lateral flexion. Then we have a bird dog. We have, for power, we have a low box jump, right? Because again, imagine somebody maybe that's the beginner that's coming in, has never done this before. We might go off, you know, 8-inch box, 12-inch box, whatever they also feel confident in doing and landing on. Strength, we're gonna do a kettlebell deadlift. Again, think about progression here, right? Maybe a trap bar deadlift. But as a beginner, we just want to really, really get this down, making sure that their form's on point. Half kneeling landmine press. The landmine press, because most people probably won't be able to go overhead as beginners. At least for us, we probably get about 7 to 8 out of 10. Can't pass the overhead flexion test. Then we got a goblet split squat, right? So goblet position, split squat. So we have more points of stability, right? By the way, I'll come back to this, but if you think progression and regression model, right? The one that's really easy to think about is load, right? Lighter versus heavier, right? But then we also have things like points of contact. So take, for example, like a reverse lunge has less points of contact, right? Because I have to step back, I'm on a single leg to go into my reverse lunge. A static lunge now has more points of contact because I have 2. But I could also go, holding onto the rig, keeping a kettlebell on this side, and now I got 3 points of contact because I'm actually helping myself with my hand support. So more points of contact, more stability that I can create. Then there's also center of gravity, right? And just think of a plank, right? If I'm here, this is a challenging plank, but if I bring my elbows out further, my center of gravity goes out further, it becomes more challenging. So there's all these different ways that we can progress. Also, stability, again, if we take away points of stability, it becomes more challenging, and we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to do, right? Do we want to progress force? And then maybe we want some more stability. Do we want to work on stability, right, and control? Then maybe we're going to use less load, but we're going to progress that. So this is an important one because, again, every time when you're looking at something, if there's pain, we want to change the movement and we want to refer out, right? If there's pains for something, we want to refer out. If there's some, range of motion restriction, we either get support, we get more stability, we change the variation. Again, if somebody doesn't have rotary stability, and think of a bird dog, they have a tough time with a bird dog, we're not going to give them, a single leg RDL because that demand for that core stability is big, and so they're not going to do that well. So this is an important factor, right, where we kind of go up and down a continuum here. But back to this, we can still get a goblet split squat, tall kneeling. We got a tall kneeling pull down, and then again we got 3 sets of 15-45, and that puts us like, for example, for most beginners, even if they're coming 3 days a week, we're gonna do ABA, BAB, right? We're just alternating those 2 strength sessions, because an important point right here, okay, is this might be just as, if not more important, than the program, because I wanted to really simplify this and, again, be able, like when I go through this in the in-staff, it's very clear at the end, and coaches will put together a program. I'll give some scenarios like, okay, great, put this program together. But it's like really building rapport, right? Really connecting to the person, really connecting to the client. Seek to understand. Remember, to be interesting is to be interested. Asking a lot of questions and connecting and building rapport is huge. And also creating buying by relating to goals. So meaning that like you're always relating the thing that you're doing to their goals. For example, right? If let's say their goal is weight loss, fat loss, core training. We'll say, hey, we're putting core training in first because it's a weak link. So when we improve and strengthen that weak link, we're going to be able to push everything else. We're going to be able to push the strength training. We're going to be able to push the cardio, and that's going to help you not build more muscle and burn more calories 24/7, which is going to help you lose weight, right? So like everything, I'm connecting it back to their goals, right? I'm creating that buy-in so that they go like, oh, okay, this makes sense. This is helping my goals. This is helping me out. Don't baby them, right? So remember, people are not like, they're not fragile, right? People are not fragile. Don't treat them as so. Like one of the biggest, I would say, benefits is that like is belief. Belief meaning we believe in our clients, and we're always talking about, hey, you can do this, right? And we're pushing them, but if, again, finding that sweet spot. Remember, if something's too easy, there's gonna be boredom. If something's too difficult, there's gonna be frustration. Find that sweet spot of challenge for them, and every time they come in, that's part of what you do. You challenge and push them to the next level, right? Use equipment. So, I mean, using equipment, number one, is it connects to them like, hey, like they're coming to the gym, they're using the cool stuff, but it's also like, use it because now they connect the strength training to the equipment. So it's not like, oh, you're just doing body weight stuff. right? Use everything in your arsenal. And by the way, like connect the equipment, going back to buy-in on how it's helping them achieve their goals, right? Very important. Think about block versus random practice. Don't just do random stuff. Build on, like think building blocks, right? That's why we're doing 4-week programs most of the time and showing them how they're improving, right? Both with numbers, right? So again, hey, listen, last week you did 10 reps. This week you did 11 reps. Last week you did, 25 pounds. This week you did 30 pounds. Okay, and again, constantly when you break this down, every single one of these, right, is practicing that skill. And as a beginner, that's such a big factor that's so important, is like practicing the skill of, we've talked about practicing nutrition skills. Here it's practicing the skill of being on a single leg, on the lunge pattern, on the squat pattern. And this brings me to the last one, which is really important, is progressive overload at the beginning can be technique, right? So imagine that like in a course of 3 weeks, you didn't even go up with weight. It's a beginner. But by week 3, their form looks really good. Right, week 1 it was like clunky, knees were collapsing, upper, shoulders were rounding on a goblet squat. But it's week 3 and it looks crisp. That's progressive overload, right? Form, I call them form PRs. So now they have a form PR, and that's great because we want to build that excellent foundation. It's a long game, and it's also great, by the way, to video things and show, hey, like this was week 1. This is week 3. Look at how much better this is. Look how much better that is, right? Shining a light on the great things, shining a light on the progress. Again, these are very, very important kind of like things when it comes to the beginner. But hopefully, again, this mini instaff has given you some insight on and simplicity on just breaking down these steps. So you can, today, you can build a bunch of programs, have them make sense, and have clients get success and results. So if you like this video, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, and let me know what would you like to see more of in Coach's Corner in our in staffs. See you next time. Peace out.